Hi, hello, and welcome back to the Wool Sea Knitting channel. My name is Rachel, and the subject of this video is my favorite lower cost, mostly natural yarns that aren't just drops. I think most of us have gone through the experience of you start knitting thinking it's going to save you a lot of money on clothes, and then it turns out knitting can quickly become an expensive hobby. It absolutely doesn't have to be though. And I find that sometimes being so immersed in knitting social media, it's really easy to get swept up in the hype or like normalization of using really luxury fibers or really luxury yarns because it seems like everybody else is. And I wanted to create a video, especially moving into holiday sale season with Boxing Day coming up and the usual flood of January sales, to go over a bunch of really excellent, mostly natural fiber yarns that won't break the bank. All of these are at most $10 US per ball, which I know is still a lot more than a lot of the acrylic blends that you could get at a lot of big box craft stores. But I wanted to focus on yarns that are mostly natural fibers because that is typically where it gets a little bit pricier and a little bit harder to source excellent budget options. However, there is some acrylic or synthetic content in a couple of the yarns I'm going to show you, and I think that that's fine too. This is in no way an indictment of acrylic yarns. I just find that it's a lot easier to find lower cost acrylic yarns that are still like higher quality, or it's pretty tricky sometimes to find inexpensive, high quality natural fibers, and so that's what I'm focusing on today. I have 8 yarns to show you plus a bonus, my favorite underrated drops yarn. Firstly, all the prices I'm going to be stating, unless I explicitly state otherwise, are going to be in USD. Even though I'm based in Canada, most of my viewers are not, and I feel like it is easiest to just talk about things in US. I think it's the most widely understood currency in comparison. I will also include the cost in Canadian dollars for all of these things because, you know, Canadian representation, and that's the currency that I'm usually shopping in. Also, all of these yarns are definitely like North America based because that's where I am and that's just what I have available to me. So I have personally worked with all of these yarns. A couple I have only knit swatches in, and one is an active project. First up on this list is Patons Kroy. If you are a longtime viewer of this channel, you know how much I love Patons Kroy. I have knit, I think, 7 or 8 pairs of socks in Patons Kroy. I am committed to it, and even when I have like goals to use up stash, it is sort of a comfort thing for me to always have at least 2 balls of Patons Kroy in stash for emergency sock knitting time. Patons Kroy comes in at about $5 to $8 per 50-gram ball, and the 50-gram balls look like this. And it comes in 1,001 different colorways. I feel like every time I go into a craft store, particularly the big box ones, I uncover a new color of Patons Kroy that I had not seen before. They have it at Michael's, they have it at Joann's, they have it at Fabricland, they have it at Fabricville, they have it everywhere, and including a bunch of local yarn stores as well. And I find that it's a little bit thicker than your standard fingering weight sock yarn, even though you still get pretty generous yardage, which means that you can use a slightly bigger needle and get socks a little bit faster than you do with the super fine 400 meters per 100 gram sock yarns. It comes in 50-gram balls, and Patons Kroy is excellent. It's super long lasting. It comes in very classic stripes. It comes in interesting, almost hand spun-esque barber pole colors that would be really nice in a fade. It comes in solids that you can use as contrast for other things, and it comes in self-patterning, super wacky colors. Everyone I've knit socks for in Patons Kroy has raved about them more so than other socks and other yarns that I've used. They're fun, they knit up super quickly, they wear super well, and they make the coziest socks. I love Patons Kroy. I think it's always a good purchase, and I highly recommend it to you. It makes the hardest wearing pair of socks known to man, in my opinion. I have put mine through so much. I made these like 4 years ago, and I still wear them all the time. I didn't stripe match match at all, and they're so rumpled because I wear them constantly. And I think that if you're not particularly sensitive to wool, this would be an option for mittens or maybe even a sweater. If you regularly shop at big box craft stores, you know that there's routinely sales or coupons available. So if you're smart about it, I know that you could probably get a ball of this for like $4. And in Canada, it's also pretty widely sold between $7 and $9. And I know you can find it cheaper with a little bit of hunting. Next up on this list is the yarn that I knit what might be my favorite summer top in, and it is Lion brand Pima cotton, which is a worsted weight 100% cotton yarn that comes in 100-gram balls. The usual retail price is between $7 to $9 US for 100 grams. And it's a pretty generous yardage, especially considering cotton weight tends to be heavier and therefore you usually get less per ball. However, it does go on sale on the Lion brand website for like $5.25 per 100-gram balls US, and you can find it in Canada between $9 and $11 Canadian. However, I got this top out of, I think, 1 3/4 of a ball, and mind you, this is a fitted top that's cropped, but I still had a lot left over. And I think compared to a lot of other cotton yarns, which get ratty looking really quickly, this one holds up well. I wear it a lot. It's creased in the middle because it's been folded, but if you look at the stitches, you can see some pilling and wear, but I've never de-pilled this. I wear it a lot in the summer, even though it's worsted weight, because it's just so soft and breathable and comfortable, and I wear it when I actually go out or to parties sometimes. And it's great. You can order it directly from Lion brand, though I know that Michaels sells it online and probably in a bunch of their stores. I originally got this from a local yarn store in Toronto, and I have been wishing desperately that they would restock it. Apparently it was super popular, but for some reason Lion brand just doesn't produce as much of this yarn. However, it is excellent and I highly recommend it. I think it would also be good for soft toys for babies or babies' clothing because of how soft it is and how easy it is to wash. And it comes in a whole bunch of different colors. I really think this is an excellent yarn, and I'm surprised that people don't talk about it more. Because it's a Lion brand offering, you can also probably wait for whenever Michaels offers another sale or coupon and snatch them up for even less than the $7.50 US that it usually retails for. Next up on this list is for the fans of 100% untreated wool who don't necessarily need their sweaters to be made out of merino and who like natural colors. I highly recommend Knit Picks Simply Wool's line. I particularly have only worked with Knit Picks Simply Wool Worsted, but I got one of my all-time favorite sweaters out of it that I wear on such a regular basis as a like outermost layer in the fall and spring and as a cozy warm sweater in the deep winter months. That is my Lakes pullover, and I've de-pilled this once after knitting it 2 years ago, and you can barely tell, and I don't think you can tell just how much hard wear I have put this sweater through. It comes in only natural colors, but a whole bunch of them, from like whites and creams to really deep chocolatey browns to this sort of cool toned taupey beige and some warm toned ones as well. It is 100 grams of worsted weight wool, but it does come in other weights as well, I understand, and the Simply Wool Worsted is $10 US per 100-gram skein. However, Knit Picks also goes on sale from time to time, so if you're strategic like I was, I think I got this for $5 per 100 grams a couple years ago and ended up paying $36 Canadian for a whole sweater's worth because the yardage is pretty generous. I have sensitive skin, and so you can see I used a different yarn for the inside of the neck, and I typically wear a t-shirt underneath this, but I don't consider that a problem. I just use this as an outerwear layer or as a slightly more polished sweatshirt. In the winter, when I just want to meet friends at a cafe or when I was still in school, I'd wear it to class. And I think it's excellent. Again, I don't know why people don't talk about this more. Knit Picks has a great selection of lower cost offerings, and for those who like natural colors, natural yarns, I think that this is an excellent option. Yarn number 4 on this list is my go-to for gift knitting sweaters, and it is Berroco Vintage DK. This yarn comes in a bunch of different weights, including a chunky, a worsted, and I think a sock weight. I typically knit with Berroco Vintage DK because I think it's just a great weight for that fiber composition. And I have knit 2 adult men's sweaters in this yarn and 2 baby sweaters, and everyone who has received one has said that they have been excellent. I don't mean that to toot my own horn in terms of like, woohoo, I make such great gifts, but I mean that in terms of wool sweaters can be very, very itchy, and the kind of thing that's really tricky to knit for babies or people who are used to hard wear on their sweaters, and this fabric has gotten really good compliments and results. Berroco Vintage is a mix of superwash wool, nylon polyamide, and acrylic or polyester, which makes it warm but a little bit more breathable, but soft and easy to go in the washer and dryer. And it usually retails in the States for about $10 per 100 grams, but you can get it cheaper. It also comes in about 1,001 different colors, and I will continue to reach for it for other people's sweaters, especially babies. I have never worked with the sock version of this, but I think it might be another good option for a fingering weight sweater to save money if you are looking to hold it with a lightweight fluffy strand of brushed alpaca or a mohair. However, I have heard anecdotally that the heavier weights of this, like Berroco Vintage Chunky or worsted, can be a little bit too heavy to make a comfortable sweater. My friend Emily from the High Fiber Knits podcast has talked about this at length in her experience with her first ever sweater garment. But for DK weight and below, I think it's a great option, and it's not too hefty with those heavy treated wool and synthetic fibers weighing it down. I have gotten a men's sweater in both Berroco Vintage DK and Berroco Vintage, just the regular worsted weight, in about 5 skeins for a men's medium and a men's large. Neither of these men were very tall, but that's pretty economical for knitting a DK weight men's sweater. Another thing that's really handy about Berroco Vintage is that it's stocked by so many local yarn stores, and it's also stocked on webs. Moving into a yarn that I am actually currently using for a project, I want to recommend Briggs and Little offerings in general, but today specifically Regal. So Briggs and Little Regal is 100% Canadian wool, and it's milled in Canada and grown in Canada, which I think helps keep costs low because you don't have as much transportation, but that's just a guess. It looks like this. It comes in these pretty unassuming hanks. It is a great, really rustic, woolly wool, low-cost option. Canadian wool can often be pretty rough, and this is a good example of that. But if you're making a sweater that you're gonna wear as basically a jacket or a cardigan, or for like, if you're going cross-country skiing, this is the number one. I'm currently making a sweater for my grandfather. This is the swatch for it. And the thing about Briggs & Little is that it's very economical because it is a DK weight yarn, so it has pretty decent meterage for usually about $10 US for 100% untreated wool in a bunch of different colors. You got heather, you got solids like this one, you got classic, you got fun, there's a beautiful lilac. But it knits up really beautifully at a worsted weight gauge as well, so you can make that yarn that you're buying in that $10 last even longer. It's well known here that it knits up really nicely at like an 18 stitch gauge too, not just a 20 to 23 stitch that you would usually use for a DK. So for example, this is an 18 stitch gauge, and it's still pretty solidly opaque because it's a rustic wool. It fluffs up nicely. It's not soft though, so this is a material that if you are sensitive, you might want to wear a t-shirt underneath or save it for socks, which is something I've also done for my grandfather. I knit a pair of socks in it, and those turned out really nicely. It blocks out quite lovely as well. And I have dreams of an all-over cabled vintage pattern from this that I would wear while doing outdoor activities because it is so warm and a very reliable yarn. Looking at yarn stores in the States that had websites, it seems that you can get this usually for $10 US at a bunch of different stores, and in Canada it's usually $9 to $11 Canadian. And so if you're American, you could just order it from a Canadian store where your currency is like 30% stronger than ours, and then just pay shipping, as long as you don't pay enough to get dinged on import-export. Another yarn I can recommend because I'm currently working with it is Sandnes Garn Pure Gynt. And I know we're not used to thinking of Sandnes Garn and the Scandinavian popular brands as super cost effective, but Each one of these balls you can find for between $6.50 and $8 per 50 grams, and then between $7 and $8 for 50 grams in Canada. Sometimes it goes on sale if there's discontinued colors. Again, I think we all know that if you want to be a budget shopper, you have to sometimes put in the legwork to find good sales, etc. And I think that this yarn is kind of overlooked because it only recently came out with the Sunday line or petite knit tie-in colors, but it is great. It knits up so nicely. It has that nice rustic Norwegian yarn hand feel that feels like it'll last quite long, and the fabric it produces thus far has been quite lovely. So, I mean, for example, this is what I'm using with 2 different colors of pure Gynt, and I have been quite pleased so far. This is pretty affordable for what you're getting, and I think that's in part because, again, this is just guessing, but I think that that's because it is from Norwegian sheep, milled in Norway, dyed in Norway, and produced there, as opposed to a lot of other yarns which are like grown in South America and then milled in Italy and then dyed in Scandinavia and then shipped to us overseas. All that type of transportation really adds up costs. And because this isn't super soft merino, you can get it for a bit less money. But if you are, again, not super sensitive, or even like me, sensitive but willing to wear a t-shirt underneath, I think this is great. It also comes in a whole bunch of currently fashionable colors, and it blocks out beautifully. And it's the exact same gauge as Sandnes Garn Double Sunday, so you can use any of those petite knit or other, like my favorite things, knitwear patterns that use that yarn and save like half the cost of it. Another thing that I suspect about this yarn, but I don't want to say definitively, is that I think it actually has very low environmental impact compared to a lot of other wool yarns. I haven't looked into it too much, but the fact that all of that supply chain is kept very localized to Norway means that you're reducing the emissions from like the dirtiest forms of transportation, which are freight shipping, which also injure wildlife in oceans quite often, and air. And it means that it's usually being produced on a much cleaner grid than a lot of other things are because it's happening in Norway. So for transportation, for energy usage purposes, I suspect this is much more environmentally friendly than a lot of other yarns, but they haven't thought to market it that way, which is good because I think that's part of why the cost is lower. And that's part of the reason why I'm so excited to buy it, because even though Norway is thousands of kilometers away and across an ocean, all of that original stuff happens on a much lower carbon intensive scale and then is just shipped to me, and that's the main carbon cost, I think, besides of course the needs of the sheep. And so I think that this is a really great eco-friendly low budget option that people don't talk about and don't realize is probably quite eco-friendly. But I haven't done a lot of research. That's just my assumption based on what I know about wool and fabric and fiber supply chains and what are the pressure points for carbon emissions along the way. The last of the big box store easy to find options I have is another Lion brand yarn, and it is Lion brand Coboo. I don't have any of it here to show you except for a washcloth that I use to take off makeup that's currently like stained forever with makeup, and I keep it in the bathroom. But Lion brand Coboo is a mix of cotton and viscose or rayon from bamboo, and you can usually get it for about $6 per 100 grams US from the Lion brand website or at Michael's stores, and it also often goes on sale. I have made 2 tops for my mother out of this yarn and 1 for a friend because my mom saw my friends and wanted one, and then she liked her first one so much that she requested a second. That is how much she loves this yarn and the summer tops I made for her in it. It is soft, it is drapey, it is breathable, it has that glossy rayon sheen to it, and it's really inexpensive. I think it is another great option for drapier summer garments that aren't meant to be as fitted as the tank top and the cotton I just showed you. And I swear I have seen either this or the partner yarn to it, the Coboo by Lion brand, at the dollar store before. So again, if you're willing to do some hunting, some legwork, I'm sure you could find this for even cheaper than the $6 US per ball, which is about $7 to $9 Canadian, depending on, again, where you find it. My point is, don't discount Michael's in the big box stores. you can really find some really good stuff in there. You just gotta hunt through a lot of the chunky acrylic to find it. No shame to chunky acrylic. I crochet with that. My favorite crochet throw is 80% acrylic, 20% wool, and it's a chunky weight yarn. And last on this list, before I go to the one drops yarn I have selected for you, is Etrofil Bluefaced Leicester yarn, and I have my swatch here, which is also crumpled from being in my craft basket. And this is a 100% Bluefaced Leicester yarn from Britain. It comes in 100-gram skeins, and it is between $9 and $10 Canadian, wherever I could find it. I couldn't find this in any US-based stores, and it feels like this only arrived in Canada in the past year, but I really like it. Again, this has the woolly texture of a Bluefaced Leicester yarn, if you're familiar with that. This is not a merino. It feels similar to pure Gynt if you have that handy and you've felt that before. But it has such beautiful drape. This is like at a 20.5 or 20. This is at a 20, I think 1 or 2 stitch gauge, and it still has such lovely drape. The stitches evened out quite beautifully in blocking, and it comes in a small selection of colors, but ones that I personally think are quite nice, like this. I think it's called pale gray on the site, but I think this is like an icy blue. Regardless, I am itching to cast on the sweater I have planned for this, and I recently got coffee and was knitting with a friend, and she showed me this super cool pair of mittens she just made, and we were talking about it, and she was like, and it's this great yarn that I just found at the store recently. It was super inexpensive considering how much yardage I got for it. I made this whole pair of mittens. I love it so much. They're warm, they're cozy, and I'm knitting a sweater in this yarn now. I was like, oh, that's so cool. What yarn? And it was the Etrofil Bluefaced Leicester. So if you're in the States, you'd have to order from, I think, a Canadian yarn shop to do it, but then again, you save 30%, so it might just be worth doing that. And it's great. I have a cabled sweater planned in this with like a cabled yoke and a raglan, and I think it's gonna be lovely. I'm thinking that this will be something else I have to wear with a layer underneath, but I think you're gleaning that 99% of the time I'm doing that with my sweaters anyway. I don't really wear them next to skin, and so that's not really a problem for me. I bought this in the spring for I think $8 or $8.50 Canadian per 100 grams, and it's a DK weight, even I would say on the lighter side of DK, so it has pretty generous yardage. And I think I've also seen it online for, you know, $9 and $10, but sales are coming up, so maybe you could find it cheaper. Last, what I think is a deeply underrated drops yarn. It is the brushed alpaca silk. It is a fluffy alpaca around a silk core yarn, and I have the same endorsement for this yarn that I do for a whole bunch of the other things I've shown you in this pile. I made one of my all-time favorite garments out of it, and that is my petite knit fortune sweater. Drops brushed alpaca silk I find to be very comfortable, even though I often find alpaca itchy on. It comes in these 25-gram balls that are between $3.50 US to like $5.50 US. I know that Wool Warehouse has it available for super cheap, and considering you're getting alpaca and silk, I think that is a phenomenal deal. I finished this 3 years ago. I wear it all the time in the spring and summer and fall because it is, as you can see, an all-over lace pattern that's quite open, and this is a pretty breezy yarn, so this is not quite suitable for like the depths of winter where I live in a cold city in Canada, but for you it might be. And I think that despite the fact that this I've worn so much that it has slightly felted in the armpits for me like rushing to get to class or work on time, and otherwise I don't even think you can see that much wear. I think it's held up so nicely. I've even put this in the washing machine on a wool cycle and it's lasted. The only thing about this is that the collar has stretched out, so I need to sew in some elastic because otherwise it sticks up a little bit. But I love this sweater and the yarn is a major contributor to it. I think another reason why this is so effective as a lower budget yarn is that it replaces 2 strands of mohair held together, but is still sold in 25-gram balls and is still really impressive in the meterage. So the pattern that I knit here was originally designed for 2 strands of lace weight mohair and created a pretty translucent design. And I held one of these and got the same gauge and got a pretty opaque sweater. And I got this out of, I think, 4.5 balls of yarn, but you can still find this across Canada for like $7 per 25 grams, which if you're using as a 2 strands of mohair replacement is a fraction of the cost. You can get it from Wool Warehouse for like $4 Canadian a ball, and it is excellent. So that is all I have for you today. Those are my 9 favorite lower cost, mostly natural yarn offerings, mostly because I'm either having an excellent time knitting with them right now, or I've owned garments in them for years at this point and find that they are still excellent. And I'm so curious, have you worked with any of these yarns before, and did you have a similarly positive experience or final object as I did? Are any of these now on your Boxing Day / January sales shopping lists because you didn't know about them before? And if you have any other low cost or budget friendly yarn, please let other people know in the comments below. And I just want to again say, knitting quickly becomes an expensive hobby, but it absolutely doesn't have to be. And don't feel like just because me and other people online are always showing off like, I got a sweater's quantity of this $20 a ball yarn, doesn't mean everyone's doing that, or that it has to be the way things are, or that it's the only way of knitting, of creating beautiful objects. And I think when I was looking through my closet recently as I was doing the switch from all my summer to my winter garments and starting to reach for sweaters again, I quickly realized that a lot of the sweaters I reached for the most, like my Lakes and my Fortune sweater, or some of my lowest cost projects. Things don't have to be luxury for them to be wonderful. And with that, I bid you goodbye and happy knitting. Talk soon.